Hello there. So, the housing market has been a bit of a hot topic for the last 2 decades. It's gotten a tad expensive in some areas, and people are really not happy about that. Luckily, we've got our best minds on the issue, and by best minds, I mean economics influencers on YouTube. Among them, a fellow with the promising name of How Money Works, who recently uploaded a video called Just Build More. Now, I don't know much about housing, so usually I just blindly trust the disembodied voice using big words. But somehow, he managed to butcher so many of the basic facts in the first minute of the video that even I could tell that something's not right. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me show you what I'm talking about.
Just build more houses. Well, we've been trying. The number of houses in America has never been higher, and even on a per capita basis, we are doing well by historical standards.
Now, this didn't sound right to me, so after conducting some in-depth research, it seems that we are not doing so good by historical standards after all. Unless you call stagnant since the 2000s doing good. Luckily, his channel is not called How Google Works, otherwise this would have been quite embarrassing. But aside from the fact that it's not true, it's not even a good metric to look at. So the total housing is obviously at an all-time high because the population is at an all-time high. Houses per capita, which we've seen isn't doing so well after all, is a better metric, but it's still not perfect. So the average household size has been decreasing historically, which means, on average, less people live together in a household. So even if we were doing well on per capita houses, we'd also have to compare this to the average household size for it to make sense. But why go through all that trouble when we can take a look at a much better metric for housing availability, the vacancy rate? So the vacancy rate is the fraction of units that is currently unoccupied, so it neatly avoids any of the issues we have when looking at just housing units. As you can see, both rental vacancy as well as homeowner vacancy rates are actually really low by historical standards. So already, the first argument he makes is ill-researched and not even factually correct, but let's give him a chance, maybe he gets better from here.
What's more is that if you looked around most big cities in the country, you would be forgiven for thinking that we are in the middle of a development boom, because we kind of are.
Okay, I didn't mean to interrupt again so soon, but this stuff takes literally 2 seconds to Google. I don't think I'm asking too much from him here. Does this graph scream construction boom to you? And this is even total rates, so it's not adjusted for population yet. I don't even know where he gets this argument from, to be honest. I don't think anybody is claiming that the US is in a construction boom right now. However, even if it were true, it'd be a little bit besides the point, because part of the issue is that looking at housing for the entirety of the US is not exactly smart. You see, the main issue of houses is that by their nature, they're a bit hard to move. Having a lot of houses in the US doesn't really help if they're all in the middle of nowhere. It's kind of like saying Nebraska is a great spot for surfing because the US is surrounded by ocean. In general, when looking at housing-related metrics, it's almost always better to look at the specific market. It doesn't really matter if there's a ton of construction in Gary, Indiana, if everybody wants to live in New York. But let's ignore the facts for a second and say there is actually a housing boom and yet nobody can afford them. Like, what does he think is happening to all the houses?
The problem is that these new homes are almost entirely made up of high-end luxury apartments or McMansions that are out of the price range of people who don't already own real estate. Even those who have benefited from increased home prices can't keep up with these new developments, which is why hundreds of thousands of these properties are now sitting empty across the country.
Okay, so we've looked at vacancy rates, so we know that part is not true. But I think in general, at least, he's learning, because the claims he's making now are nebulous enough that you cannot debunk them with a single Google search anymore. The problem here is, it's not actually straightforward to determine what counts as luxury housing, but generally, construction companies build the kind of housing that they can sell. And that means it's housing that someone can afford to buy. If they cannot sell it, the companies go bankrupt. But one more time, let's just assume what he says is true and say they are only building luxury houses. So we know these houses are not sitting empty forever, because we would see that in the vacancy rate, which means someone is moving into them. And when they do, generally, another house, usually a less expensive one, is freed up, and someone moves in there. And this chain continues, so overall, more houses is really good for everyone, even if they're in the higher price classes. Alright, so we've gone over how he gets the most basic facts completely wrong when he can be bothered to use any at all, but that's not all of it. It wouldn't truly be a YouTube video essay if it didn't present an overly simplistic populist solution to a complex unresolved issue. So here's what How Money Works thinks causes all of this.
Well, there are a few reasons. The first might come as a shock to you if you have watched this channel for a while. Yeah, no, I'm kidding. It's private equity.
Of course, he doesn't bother to substantiate this claim at all, I suspect because he can't. It would be nice if we had one catch-all source for all of our housing woes. If it was due to the rich or private equity buying up all the properties or all the companies, then the solution would be really simple. Reality is usually more complicated. There's a whole bunch of factors that can affect the real estate prices in an area, like the geography of the city, differences in regulation like restrictive building codes or zoning and laws and so on. In all fairness, How Money Works does mention a few more things, mostly relating to the stagnant productivity of the residential construction sector over the last few decades. I don't really have a problem with those sections. In fact, I think they're quite interesting. However, with the amount of errors and baseless claims, I think the video really does a disservice to the economists and social scientists doing rigorous work on the housing market and policymakers who actually want to improve the situation. Channels like How Money Work make money by peddling misleading and simplistic narratives, and by doing so distract from the real problems and solutions. Anyway, that's it. See you next time.